Star Trek Deep Space Nine started out as the black sheep of the franchise, only years later becoming one of the most beloved Treks of all time. But what were some of the stories that didn't make it on screen? Well, today, we find out. Hello and welcome to Backtrek, a web series that focuses on the background information on any given topic in Star Trek. In this episode, we're taking a look at some of the abandoned episode ideas for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, to better understand their place in Star Trek history. Last week, we took a deep dive into the undeveloped episode ideas for Star Trek The Next Generation, and to accompany that video, I created a poll for the channel asking what series all you good trinaries were most excited about seeing undeveloped script ideas for, and I was shocked to find out that it was Deep Space Nine. Not because I don't love DS9, because I do, but rather because I expected it to be the most viewed series on the various streaming services, which of course is Star Trek Voyager. So it really warms my heart to be wrong, and I love surprises. And thus I quickly threw this video together for you all to enjoy. So anyhow, now, with all that out of the way, let's take a look at some of these never-produced gems. Written by Michael McGreevy, the idea for a Bashir Dax-type romance story was seeded in the very first episode of the show. As laid out, the story would have seen the Dax symbiont getting gravely ill, forcing Dr. Bashir to remove it from Jadzia to treat it. The side effect of this process would see a completely different Jadzia, a Jadzia that would in fact fall in love with Julian as she was no longer under the influence of her slug. We would have come to see the personality of Jadzia as an individual, which of course would be very different from Dax. In turn, Bashir falls in love with her as well, but during the process of treating the symbiont, Bashir realizes that the only way to save it was to put it back into Jadzia, and thereby losing the girl he loves. After a big back and forth about their love for each other, but also about how the most important thing to a Trill is the survival of the slug, Bashir agrees with Jadzia to recombine the two, and the show would end with the now restored Jadzia Dax telling Bashir that basically it would never work out between them. Though a great story, the powers that be on Deep Space Nine would end up abandoning it, not interested in any true romance developing between Bashir and Dax. An episode idea by Robert Hewitt Wolfe, Cardassian O'Brien would see the audience discover that the lovable Chief of Operations was actually a deep-cover Cardassian agent, surgically altered to appear human. Wolfe loved the backstory that Miles had, and wanted to explain some of his days serving on the Rutledge. In fact, Wolfe went so far as to have O'Brien being replaced during the Setlik III massacre. The deep cover O'Brien would have been given the real O'Brien's memories, and wouldn't have known he was actually a Cardassian. Though the idea was received quite well by the Deep Space Nine writing staff and the powers that be, Wolfe faced a huge problem in logic with the whole story, that ultimately he wasn't able to work out, and that was of course Molly O'Brien. If Miles O'Brien had actually been a Cardassian that was surgically altered, his daughter Molly would have come out being half human and half Cardassian, which would have given up the gig back on the Enterprise. Though he tried hard to make the whole thing work, he never was able to solve the problem, and eventually Wolfe rewrote the episode, changing the plot to become Season 3's episode Second Skin, replacing Miles O'Brien with Kira Nerys. Deep Space Nine never shied away from different or more bizarre story ideas. Proposed by Christopher Teague, in a story outline inspired by the magician Jeff McBride, Circus would have seen just that, a circus making a stop at Deep Space Nine. Christopher even had the intention of Jeff McBride appearing in the episode. It also would have been an Odo-centric show, and a figure would be chasing Odo within his dreams. This figure was a mysterious masked man, inspired by the masks used by McBride during his own shows. The idea of bringing a visiting circus onto Deep Space Nine didn't appeal to the writers at all. Downright, they refused to do it. However, eventually several plot elements would be removed from the idea, rewritten, and become the episode Equilibrium. Far Beyond the Stars would become a highly rated, fan-favorite episode for the series. But long before that idea would hit the drawing board, Cold and Distant Stars would make its rounds among the writers. Another story imagined by Robert Hewitt Wolfe, this idea would see Benjamin Sisko waking up on a beach in Santa Monica in the year 1995. Though he would appear disheveled and disoriented, Sisko would be aware that he was a Starfleet commander, though everyone around him believed that he was simply mad. Sisko would be ranting and raving about how he was a captain of a starbase, and that he didn't belong in 1995. There were many problems with this story, however, one major one being that Brannon Braga felt they had already done the exact same story with Commander Riker in the TNG episode Frame of Mind. Nevertheless, Ira Steven Behr would purchase the idea and give it the go-ahead to be developed, and after a few rewrites, the story would be completely changed. Now, through amazing fake science, Sisko's consciousness would end up detached from his body, and one of his ancestors in 1995, one that looked just like the station commander, would end up tuning in to this disembodied consciousness, as described like two radios tuned in to the same frequency. Part of Robert's idea was to utilize the other main cast members as characters in 1995, appearing the same with jobs very similar to their future counterparts, i.e. Odo being a cop, Bashir a 20th century doctor, O'Brien a mechanic, etc. No one ended up happy with the script or ideas contained within it, and believe it or not, eventually the entire story would be rewritten into the two-part episode Past Tense, and the homeless Starfleet guy idea would be used in Voyager's two-parter Future's End. Since the beginning of DS9's run, fans of the show were waiting for a huge crossover event between Deep Space Nine and The Next Generation. Being this was the first time two separate Star Trek series were even on the air together, it was the assumption by fandom that a huge team-up event was inevitable. Originally considered for the first season finale, crossover would see the Enterprise and Deep Space Nine taking on an invasion force. The Cardassian Union, not happy with several events that occurred during Season 1, would finally decide to reinvade the Bajoran star system and take back Deep Space Nine. An epic battle with the station and the Enterprise would show finally just how strong Starfleet and the Enterprise D truly was. Everyone loved the idea and immediately began to crunch the numbers to make this finale a reality. Unfortunately, however, it simply was never to be. At the time, the amount of money that would be required to make this dream a reality was astronomical. The tension and excitement, of course, coming from the epic battle, and if the battle wasn't truly epic, well, then the story would just flounder. And so, although they tried hard to bring this idea to the screen, eventually it just had to be dropped as impossible for the time, and the epic crossover would never happen. And by the time Star Trek had the technology to make the epic battle needed, namely CGI, it was too late, as the TNG crew were firmly entrenched in their own movies, while Voyager was halfway across the galaxy in the Delta Quadrant. Elements from this story, however, would end up being used for the Season 5 finale, Call to Arms. The Great Escape was a 1963 epic adventure war film starring Steve McQueen, James Garner, and Richard Attenborough. As the title suggests, it was all about the attempt to escape a POW camp during the events of World War II. Huge fans of the story, the Deep Space Nine writing team decided they wanted to pay homage to the film, making a Michael Eddington escaping Deep Space Nine after his capture in the episode For the Uniform. The idea was to make the audience root for Eddington's escape, and therein lied the problem. Michael Eddington was never really a fan-favorite character for the show. In the original film, it had heroes, Allied POWs escaping the Nazis. Eddington, on the other hand, wasn't really seen as a hero to begin with. Sure, you could say his fight against the Cardassians was heroic, but in essence, he had betrayed the actual heroes of the show, Sisko, Kira, Dax, etc. So the idea of having the audience root for Eddington, with Eddington eventually successful in escaping the station, became something that no one believed the audience wanted to see. And so this idea would be shelved, but not entirely forgotten, as this story would be reworked and directly influence the two-part episode In Purgatory's Shadow and By Inferno's Light, putting Garrick and Worf, two characters loved by fandom, as the centered escaping prisoners. Deep Space Nine would never receive the praise it truly deserved during its initial run. Many fans of the time citing Deep Space Nine as a non-Roddenberry dark version of Star Trek, and they were completely uninterested in supporting a show that they believed Roddenberry would never approve of. Deep Space Nine was most definitely a more realistic Star Trek show. It tackled deeper issues head-on, with a grace and poise that was at the very core of what Star Trek truly was. A science fiction show designed to make you think, open your heart, and understand a different point of view. Deep Space Nine took Star Trek into the unknown, proving once and for all that the human adventure was truly only beginning. Thank you for watching today's episode of Backtrack. What do you think of these abandoned story ideas? Which ones would you have loved to have seen? Would you like me to create more of these videos about these lost tales? Well, leave your comments in the section below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Want to help the channel continue to bring these gems to life? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.